welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Today I want to talk about how to prepare for power outages. We've all seen the devastation from Hurricane Helene. Hurricane Milton is on the way, and actually by the time this video posts it may have already hit, and who knows what will happen with that. But outside of these devastating natural disasters, power outages can happen on a more regular basis and lesser scale. For instance, here in our area, it seems like we always lose power at least one time every winter for 2 to 3 days. It's just been that way for the past several years. We've had power knocked out from just severe thunderstorms. So it doesn't have to be something on like a national scale that we need to be preparing for, but power outages, I would say, is probably one of the most disruptive aspects of natural disasters, or even just something like an ice storm or a snowstorm or a tornado or something like that, because we are so dependent on electricity to cook and to heat in our homes and cool our homes. Fridge, freezers, all of those things depend on electricity. So when that's taken away just all of a sudden, it can really throw us through a loop. So today I want to talk about 5 specific ways that we can prepare for power outages. Now, the first thing that comes to mind obviously is a generator. And of course, if you have the means to do that, I do highly recommend investing in some sort of generator and some sort of backup power supply. But that's not going to be the focus of this particular video. I'm going to be focusing mostly on some other kind of more affordable items, but also just strategies for how we can prepare for power outages. So if that interests you, stick around. Let's get started. Tip or strategy number 1 is going to be prepare food ahead of time. And within that regard, I wanted to share a few tips about that. So one thing that we are huge on here at Food Prep Guide is canning and dehydrating. One thing that I'm sure everyone is aware of and everyone is seeing talk and chatter and posts on social media about how all of these families that have been devastated by Hurricane Helene, they're losing all the food in their freezers and refrigerators. It's been a wonderful show of support in the community when people they see that they're about to lose all this food, and I'm hearing that they are doing huge grill outs and having everyone come so that everyone can feast and eat before, so that food doesn't go to waste, which is fantastic. But in a kind of a longer term situation like that, when the food is gone, it's gone. And a lot of times, unless you have a generator, there's no way to save that food in your freezer. And so one of the ways that our family has already prepared in that regard is just to not use our freezers to store the bulk of our food. Like, instead of blanching and freezing food from the garden, we can it. Instead of freezing the deer that we hunt and harvest, we can it, and stuff like that, because even with no natural disasters, we still lose power pretty frequently compared to people like in a city neighborhood. So if you do not know how to can, I highly recommend learning how to soon. And we do have an online canning class that is self-paced, so you can work through it at your own pace on your own schedule. It is called the Canning 101 Masterclass, and I will link that down in the description box below. But if you do already know how to can, I highly recommend going ahead and getting a plan together for getting foods out of your freezer and into shelf-stable options. It's just a smart thing to do to prepare for potential power outages in the future, and most of the time we have no idea when those will hit or why it may be happening. So just to avoid the absolute heartbreak and the money loss, the financial loss of losing all of the contents of your freezer, go ahead and start thinking through ways that you can get those shelf stable. The other way that we can prepare food in advance is going to be preparing heat and eat meals via canning or even dehydrating or freeze drying if you have a freeze dryer. I am canning up a bunch of meals in jars right now. That's kind of like the kick that I'm on. During the fall and winter, after I'm done with the garden harvest, I usually transfer my canning focus over into broths, beans, meats, and meals in jars. So that's kind of the phase that I'm in already, but I'm kind of ramping up my efforts in the meals in jars category. And what that does, not only does it provide you the ability to feed yourself and your family quickly and easily, because all you have to do is heat it up. And if you're in an instance where you don't have power, if you absolutely have to, you can start a fire and cook that way. You can have a grill. If you stock propane or charcoal for that grill, you can get a portable Coleman camp stove that uses the propane bottles, cartridges that just screw right into that. There are many options for cooking kind of off-grid or without power. I recommend a thermal cooker because you can it just is a way for you to conserve your fuel source, because all of those items that I just mentioned, with the exception of a campfire, requires a fuel source, and we want to make that fuel last as long as possible. So a thermal cooker allows you to bring food to a boil for around 5 minutes, sometimes up to 10 minutes if you were to do like a large chunk of meat, which probably aren't doing in that kind of scenario anyway. But in general, you just got to bring your food up to a boil for 5 minutes, and then you can transfer it to the thermal cooker and just set it and forget it, and your food will be ready several hours later. So you're only using 5 minutes of fuel versus 20 to 30 minutes of fuel if you were to cook that meal from scratch. So a thermal cooker is highly recommended. But canning up meals in jars is highly recommended, or soups and stews, anything that you can heat and eat just like that with a spoon out of the jar, or something that you can heat and pour over something like rice, mashed potatoes, pasta, something like that. Although it probably would be a little bit difficult to cook up a pot of pasta without some kind of grill or Coleman camp stove or something like that. I've been hearing that things like making a pot of spaghetti with a marinara sauce and a package of noodles is like totally not realistic right now for a lot of those people impacted in this in the eastern region, and that what's far more helpful is a can of SpaghettiOs. And so just kind of keep that in mind as you are preparing to cook without power. Think ahead about what would be the easiest to dump into a bowl and heat and eat. And what would even be safe if you couldn't even heat it at all? What if all you could do is open up the jar and eat it straight out of the jar with a spoon? What are some safe ways to do that? So be thinking about that. We do have some meals in jars recipes on our blog and on our website, and I will link those in the description box below if I can get that word out. Okay, tip or strategy number 2 is going to be, how do we protect and store water in that kind of situation? I live on a well, so when the power goes out, the water goes out. Even if you are on city water, you might not lose water, but depending on what the disaster or the reason for the power outage is, the water might be contaminated. We just have no idea. So I'm coming from a perspective of, if the power's out, the water is either out as well, or the water is going to be unsafe or unusable. What do we do at that point? So one of the things that I recommend is getting a water bob bag. A water bob bag is basically a plastic liner that has a siphon pump that you can line your bathtub with and put water in there. But where are we going to get that water from if we can't, get it from our faucet or get it from the water hose? If you can get it from the faucet and the water hose, that's fantastic. And then all you would need to do is boil it in order to drink it. But what if that's not an option? So other options are getting buckets and scooping it out from a pond or a creek nearby, but you would have to have some sort of water filtration system or water purification tablets, or something like the Life Straw water bottles, something that can safely filter out that sort of thing. Another thing is, if you do have some sort of alternative power source, what we have done in extended power outages in our family is to not run the generator all the time, because we are trying to conserve fuel, but to run the generator long enough to power the well, to then fill up the bathtub, to fill up 5-gallon buckets, to fill up sinks, to fill up containers, and then turn it off again. And that's how we kind of replenish our water in that regard. If it is the winter time, the water bob bags I heard were very helpful in Texas when they had that huge snow and ice storm. Was it last winter or was it 2 winters 2 winters ago now. I can't remember. It may have been 2 years ago. I don't know. Time flies. But when they had that just freak snow and ice storm down there, lost power for an extended amount of time, people were filling up their bathtubs with snow, which would then melt into water. So if the power outage happens during the winter and there's snow on the ground, that is certainly an option as well. But in order to basically use any of your water source safely in that kind of situation without power, you're going to have to boil it over a fire to drink, or have some sort of water filter option with purification tablets, life straw filters, something like a Berkey water filter, or even a homemade version with using like activated charcoal and pebbles and sand and all of that. You can make one pretty frugally with a 5-gallon bucket system. But that is something that I highly recommend that you research, because it's kind of beyond the scope of this video, but that's another helpful thing as well as a homemade type filtration system. So tip number 3 is going to keep either a battery operated radio and then stock batteries so that you don't run out for an extended amount of time, or use one of those hand crank solar radios. But one of the things that I'm seeing the most kind of devastating consequence of not only this storm but also being out of power is the lack of communication. So having that battery powered radio and then storing batteries is just going to allow you to be able to know what is going on, how much longer can we expect this power outage to last, getting updates from the power company, from the news stations about where they're at with power restoration. You know, is this going to be 3 days? Is this going to be 2 weeks? And it can just help you stay informed and be able to make better decisions about how much fuel you're using, whether or not you need to be rationing it, food, water, all of that sort of thing. I highly recommend doing that if it is possible, kind of within that battery powered radio category. If you can get a portable solar charger that is just big enough to power your devices, anything that's USB that plugs in with USB, they make, we have one from a company called Sunjack. I can vet for them. They are a very high quality company. I trust their solar panel products, and they are comparatively affordable compared to all of how expensive solar panel setups are. I'm talking something that can fit in a backpack. It folds up and it has multiple charging outlets, but just being able to keep anything that has plugs in via USB, and you can think outside of the box for that. So for instance, I drink a smoothie every morning, and to be quite honest, I would be devastated without my blender. I use my blender so much. So I invested in one of those blenders that is operated via a USB charger, so that I can still fix my smoothie, I can still blend up our meal in a jar soups, I can still do any blending in a pinch. It's not going to be high powered like my Vitamix, but it will absolutely get the job done, and I don't have to worry about having power for that. So you can think outside of the box. There are so many devices these days that charge via USB. We are no longer limited to a volt or just a regular electrical outlet where you're having to get an inverter with your solar system and all that. You can get solar panels that charge directly to, that have USB ports or USB-C, lightning ports, you know, all those different things are built right into those panels. I will try to find the one that we have and link it in the description box below, because it has a USB, it has a lightning port, and I believe a USB-C, which is like the micro one. And we have already used it several times, and it is very high quality. So in that regard, as far as communication and charging of devices, you can get something that is budget friendly, that you don't have to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on, and it is a lifesaver, and it can potentially be a literal lifesaver, as we are seeing over in the East right now, on the East Coast. So tip number 4 for preparing for power outages is going to be think ahead for how you are going to heat your home if it were to happen in the winter, and how you are going to keep cool if it were to happen in the summer. That first tip I said heat your home in the winter, and that's kind of, let me backtrack that a little bit, because what we have found, we have had power outage in the heat of summer, and we have had power outage during an ice storm where temperatures were in the negatives. So we've kind of experienced both ends of this, but it wasn't extended. I'm not trying to compare, you know, to natural disasters. It's totally different. But I'm just saying that I have experience with, you do not want to be attempting to heat your entire house or cool your entire house in that kind of situation. It's just not going to happen. Or you can make it happen, but you're going to waste fuel and you're going to run through your fuel way too fast. So let's talk about some tips in that regard. If a power outage were to happen in the winter, one of the best things that I have found, we haven't had to turn to this yet, but it is our plan for if we had to do an extended power outage during the winter, and that is popping up a tent in our living room and having the whole family sleep in that tent. And inside that tent, you can't have any open flames, of course. You can't bring any propane heaters, even the ones that are rated for indoor safe use. You wouldn't want to have that inside of a tent. It's just too dangerous. The risk is too high. So what can we have? You can have those crack and use heat warmers, those hand warmers, where they're activated by cracking them. It is pretty amazing how far heat excuse me, can spread in a small space when you have multiple humans in that small space with you, because not only you're benefiting from each other's body heat, the tent is trapping it in, and then you can have just a small heat source, like each person, or not even each person. We tested out one time, not inside of a tent, but in our living room, just having 3 heat warmers, hand warmers between the 5 of us, and that was almost okay. It was kind of uncomfortable, but it would work in a pinch. Another thing that you can use is sterno cans. Sterno cans, depending on, I think there are some that have an open flame, and that one, I don't think that would be safe inside of a tent. I'm not 100% sure on that, so please do your own research. But I do know that sterno cans have been really helpful for being able to heat and eat meals, but also heating up a really small area. So consider that as well. If it is another option for heating in the winter time without power, is going to be one of those kerosene heaters, and then a clean burning 1K rated kerosene, being able to stock those and have those on hand. I think a gallon of kerosene is going for like $12 or $13 in my area right now, or online. I don't know what those prices are nationwide, but I'm just saying that it is a somewhat affordable option for being able to remain warm in a situation when you can't depend on the power to keep you warm. Of course, if you have a fireplace, we don't have a fireplace, so a lot of these tips are for people who don't have fireplaces. If you have a fireplace, you're pretty much set as long as you have firewood. So keep that in mind when you're house buying. A chimney and a fireplace is fantastic. We don't have that here, and it really irks me that we do not have a fireplace or a chimney. So that's kind of all these tips are like for people who don't have that. But that would be the first thing I would go to if power outage were to happen in the wintertime. Let's switch to summertime. If the power outages were to happen in the heat of the summer, I personally have struggled more in the summer than I have in the winter, because I haven't found like what I would consider a perfect solution for keeping cool during the summer with no power. The best thing I have found is battery-powered fans for each person, and having a wet towel, getting a towel wet and draping that towel either in front of the fan or like over the fan, if you can do that safely. Or if you have, normally, if you're in that kind of situation, you don't really have ice, you know. So a lot of articles I read online, they're like, oh yeah, set the fan in front of a thing of ice. And I'm like, where are you going to get the ice? We don't have freezers. There's no power. There's no way to get ice. But I know that there are, you know, if you have a generator, you have a freezer, you have ice. If you have the ability to drive, you can go to a gas station. Maybe they have ice. So, I mean, if you do have access to ice, that would be extremely helpful, to have a bucket of ice and set the fan behind that ice and have the person sit in front of it so that air blows across that cool bucket of ice, and that is helpful too. Otherwise, it's just a matter of keeping your windows closed, keeping sunlight out of the house, and spending a lot of time out in the breezes when they happen. If you can find a place of shade, to stay out of direct sunlight but still benefit from the airflow of that. But I wish I had better advice for that. If anyone has experience with keeping cool in the heat of summer without power, please, please, please let us know your tips and advice. Everyone share everything you know about keeping comfortable in power outages. Let's turn this comment section into a rich source of information for everyone who stops by this video. I would be incredibly grateful for y'all if you did that. Okay, number 5 tip or strategy to prepare for power outages is to go ahead and plan for your alternative cooking source, which we kind of talked about this in the food, but yeah, I mean, we kind of already covered that. But again, food and cooking food, like one of the things that I've been hearing that's coming out of the East Coast right now is that people are hunting like squirrels and rabbits and having to cook those over an open flame. And I think we are going to be hearing about so many more stories coming out over the coming weeks and even months, because there are still people who have no communication access and no access to the internet, so their stories haven't even gotten out into the world yet. So who knows everything that's going to be coming out. But I'm going to change my tip number 5, because I had alternative cooking source, but as I'm talking, like all these thoughts are coming into my head, and I hope I'm not rambling and getting confused, but I'm just thinking about knowledge. That's what keeps coming to my mind. Knowledge, skills. The people who are surviving these terrible conditions are the people who know how to skin a rabbit. They are the people who know how to start a fire. They are the people who know how to build a shelter. And, you know, I know we don't like to think about needing those things and don't like to think about being in a situation where skills are the difference between life and death, but they can be. So I'm going to change point number 5 to be gain knowledge and skills. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give is to purchase in print, paper, in your hand books, because you're not going to be able to Google search how to skin a rabbit. You're not going to be able to Google search how to butcher a chicken or how to filter water, how to build your own, because let's say you had no idea this hurricane was coming because you live in the mountains in North Carolina, and so that's just not something you prepared for. So you didn't have a water filtration system, and you know, now you have no water. And so there are ways and materials in nature that you can use to filter water. But if you don't know that before, you're not going to be able to Google how to do it in that kind of situation. So I highly recommend getting books that teach you those things, and just like a reference manual that, you know, you don't have to, I'm not saying you have to sit down and learn, you know, an entire lifetime of skills within the next 2 weeks, because something might happen, but having those reference materials on hand so that when you are in that situation, you can go to that chapter on water filtration using natural materials and get yourself through that kind of situation. A couple of books that I can think of off the top of my head is the Country Living Encyclopedia. I don't know that encyclopedia is actually in the name. I think it's just called Country Living. But I have the 50th anniversary edition. The book is about that thick. And despite being that thick, it's only, I don't know what the price is now, but when I bought it, it was only $20. And it is just an excellent, I mean, it feels like it has everything that I could possibly need to know about being without power out in the country and needing to survive, needing to feed my family, needing to bathe, needing to have clean water, needing to stay warm, needing to stay cool. There are just so many incredible, rich nuggets of wisdom in that book, so I highly recommend that one as like an all-purpose thing. If you are someone, or maybe your children, they like to read, they like to learn through stories, the Foxfire series of books, Foxfire? Yeah, I think it's Foxfire. I'm going to link these into the description box below, and I will go and make sure that it's called, I was about to say Fox Farm, but I don't think it's Fox Farm. I think it's Foxfire, but I will link it in the description box below in case I have it wrong. But it's a series of books that, I mean, they have dozens and dozens, and each book addresses like a handful of topics, and it's kind of like story-based style, and a lot of them are actually written in from people who lived in Appalachia, and so it's like a way of life for them that they have been passing down in story format, and even with diagrams. It's just a fantastic book. If you're homeschooling, they're fantastic books for homeschooling, but they're just great books to have on your shelf. If you do not have a field guide, I think I have, yeah, okay, a field guide for your particular area. This is the one for the Eastern and Central North America because that's where I am. But the Peterson field guides, they have them for mushrooms, they have them for edible plants, which is what this edition is. They have them for medicinal plants, and they have one, I think, for like dangerous, really bad poisonous type plants too. And it's just, they're full of diagrams, they're full of tips and drawings that focused on the wild edibles. Whoops, I'm sorry. Got an alarm going off. That focus on the plants that are in your particular area. So definitely be careful about which edition you get, because they have one for north, south, east, west. So definitely be careful about which edition you get, and get the one for your particular area. These are just great little books to have on your shelf for gaining knowledge and skills, because that is something that is going to get you through a power outage much more comfortably and much more safely than if you were to not have that skill set, if you were to not have this knowledge or these reference books to be able to reference once you're in that kind of situation. Okay, y'all, I know not super fun to think about, not super fun to have to prepare for, but I think recent events have shown that it is wise to prepare for these things no matter where you are, no matter what type of area of the country you're expected to have natural disasters. Like if you live in Florida, you know you need to prepare for hurricanes. But people in North Carolina, they don't need to prepare for hurricanes. At least they didn't. So it doesn't matter what area of the country you are in. I highly recommend just thinking through what are some ways and what are some things that I can get right now, some knowledge that I can practice right now to get my family comfortably through a power outage. I hope that was helpful to y'all, and we will see you next time. Bye.